Are you saying that after more than 30 years, the United States is going to start detonating nuclear weapons?
I'm saying that we're going to test nuclear weapons like other countries do, yes.
President Trump discussing his recent order for the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing in an interview with 60 Minutes last Sunday. Now Vladimir Putin is responding and floating the possibility of doing the same. The Russian leader saying this: if the U.S. or any other state party to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was to conduct such tests, Russia would be under obligation to take reciprocal measures. Just a short time ago, I spoke with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, now director of the Hoover Institute. Can we start with Putin? And is he feeling emboldened? Is he feeling nervous? He's continuing in Ukraine, but what about this nuclear testing issue?
Well, he responds to everything, and so I would not put that much stock in everything that Vladimir Putin says. I will say this, the president's right, we have to maintain the reliability of the nuclear stockpile. We do have ways to do that have been used over the last several years, modeling that they do in the laboratories, and so I'm sure he's in conversation with Secretary Wright and others about what really needs to be done, but we actually do make sure that we're maintaining the reliability of our stockpile.
At this point in the war against Ukraine, what would be the best thing for President Trump or the NATO forces to do to try to force change there?
I fully understand that President Trump gets it. The only person who can stop this war is Vladimir Putin, and they've tried a variety of things to get Vladimir Putin's attention. They've tried bringing him to Alaska. They've tried threatening him. I think he just doesn't believe he can't defeat Ukraine. So I think we have to show him that we're going to be there for the Ukrainians, continue to give them the weapon systems that they need to hold at risk things that matter to the Russians. I would probably at this point release those frozen assets, $300 billion in Russian central bank assets. I know people talk about would that be somehow a bad thing because it would show that we can't. Well, you know, if you don't invade your small neighbor and try to extinguish another country, we would never do this.
Who releasing the assets, though, to who?
So I would release them to probably a bank to help the Ukrainians use them in the right way, because we do have to be concerned about using them in the right way. But I would not be deterred in using them by thinking we're setting some sort of precedent. So there are plenty of things we can do to help Ukraine. The Russians are having some problems. There are gas lines in Moscow because they don't have enough refined product. The Ukrainians have been attacking the oil and gas infrastructure. So help the Ukrainians keep the Russians at bay and begin to rebuild Ukraine as soon as possible.
One of my favorite things to do with you is to go around the world. So can we go to Venezuela now? And the Congress recently, I think yesterday, just got an update from the Trump administration as what's going on with President Trump's intentions there. He's, I think, being intentionally and purposefully and strategically vague, but to keep Maduro on his toes. Your thoughts on what's happening down there?
I suspect that's exactly what's going on, is a sense to kind of pressure Maduro to say to him, you know, it's really time for you to go. He is really a cancer in the region. He's a cancer for the countries around the region. There's every bit of evidence that he might have had something to do with the presidential election in Colombia, which has brought somebody to power who is himself associated with narco-terrorism. And so putting pressure on Maduro is a really, really important thing to do. I don't know about the use of American forces. I'm not a big believer that you can bring regime change through putting American forces on the ground. But I do think the pressure is a good thing. We also have to note that the Cubans are really a lot of Maduro's shock troops. They can't get the backing from the Russians these days that they once did because Vladimir Putin is busy, shall we say. So hopefully this combination of kinds of pressure on Maduro will bring change. The Venezuelans deserve it. They've suffered a long time.
Your thoughts on regime change, is that born out of the experience in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, we never went into Iraq and Afghanistan for regime change. We went in because there were security issues, and then you have to have a view of what to do about the regime. But I think just the idea that you go in just to change your regime with military force, I would be careful about.
And if you actually read all the articles, not just the headlines, it doesn't sound like that's what Trump is wanting to do anyway.
I think the president has a pretty good skepticism.
Yeah, the media's gotten out a little bit ahead of that. One more foreign policy question, and then one about socialism. Nigeria. the attacks against Christians. Like there's violence all over the world. These attacks are quite violent. We've been talking about it here a little bit. President Trump is saying that it needs to stop, or that we will do something. Should we do something?
Well, we should be putting a lot of pressure on the Nigerian regime. Part of the problem is that that's a part of Nigeria that isn't totally under control of the Nigerian regime. They have a split in their country, kind of Muslim area versus the Christian area, but we should be putting a lot of pressure on them and just raising the profile about what's going on there. You know, if the UN actually wanted to do something useful, maybe they could pass a resolution on something like this instead of some of the things that they do. But I do think we have a lot of aid that we give to Nigeria. We've helped them in a lot of ways, so we should be saying, make sure this stops.
Are you kind of stunned at how irrelevant the UN feels right now?
The UN has always been only as relevant as the United States and other countries are willing to make it. And right now, because of the Security Council split between the Russians, the Chinese, and the United States, Britain, and France, you're not going to get much done in the UN.
So one domestic policy question, and that is that we had an election in New York City and across the country on Tuesday. 66% of young people believe that they see socialism more positively than capitalism. They voted in great number for Zohran Mamdani, a democratic socialist. They like the ideas of the promises. What should conservatives or even just capitalists be doing and saying, you have a chance to talk to a lot of students at Stanford? Do you see this? Is it a pattern? What should we be concerned?
This is a little bit our fault, right? In universities, even in high schools, we've really not taught history in a way that when our students hear the word socialism, they think, oh, you mean that Soviet experiment that failed? And so I think this is first and foremost an educational mission. Yeah, if you listen to free this and free that, it sounds good. But we have to remind our students that from each according to his means, to each according to his needs has never worked except at gunpoint. And then it actually hasn't worked very well in those. So I think if we do a good job of education here, but we are having a moment in our country where we're swinging kind of wildly because the American people are looking for answers. They're looking for answers to their economic challenges. They're looking for answers to what they're facing in technology that seems to be changing the job perspective. If you're a young person graduating from college and you're looking at the AI revolution, you are asking yourself, am I going to have a job here? So let's address root causes, show them that capitalism works. In fact, that capitalism is the only thing that has ever worked, and stop teaching them in our history that somehow the United States is the failed state. We've had lots of failed states, and most of them were socialist.
I wish I could come take your class.
Anytime.
Okay. We'll be there. Thank you. Condoleezza Rice.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.